It would be nice if there was a one-size-fits-all path to success, wouldn't it? An individual's blueprint for success is as unique as their fingerprints are. I'm Gary Cornwell, president of Galactic Performance Solutions. As someone who didn't come from much, I had to come a long way to get where I am today. In the end, I did find my way, and I want to help you find yours too. I may not have the exact answers for your circumstance and how to build a successful life, but what I know for sure is that you have those answers within yourself. Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, the podcast that focuses on helping you become the best, brightest, and most financially secure version of yourself. Hello, welcome to Beyond the Blueprint. This is your host, Gary Cornwell. I wanted to start off by apologizing in advance. I may or may not be coughing during this episode. I'm fighting a cold, but I didn't want to let that stop me from recording this next episode. So again, welcome. First thing I want to ask you is, did you do your homework? If you listened to the last podcast, you know what I'm talking about. What did you do that was going to cause you to take action, to set yourself on the right path to success? Did you make your bed this morning? That's a battle amongst itself. Did you write down your goals? Did you write down what you will accomplish today? Did you buy that book? One of the things that we mentioned is buy a book, set it somewhere where you have to look at it. So sooner or later, you're going to read it. Speaking of books, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to compare and contrast a couple of the books that I think that everybody should read. Over the course of this podcast, we're going to talk about several books. The first two we're going to talk about are by an author called Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And we're going to compare that to a gentleman named Dave Ramsey, who's written multiple books. So has Robert Kiyosaki. But the one we're going to talk about that Dave wrote initially is called Total Money Makeover. We're going to look at what they are trying to teach us in these books, and we're going to compare and contrast what I call the realities or the day-to-day differences between those. So let's look into each one of them. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Again, the author's name is Robert Kiyosaki. A little bit about Robert. So Robert grew up in Hawaii. The general overview of the book is that he grew up with a father who was an academic. The academic father was extremely intelligent, but he didn't really understand the ins and outs of money, investing, things like that. Well, Robert's best friend's father wasn't necessarily as academically inclined, but also, if the story's true, also understood money very well, understood how to use money to be able to create more money. So as a general overview of the book, it goes through the things that Robert's rich dad, which is his friend's father, taught him and how to use those tools to impact his personal finance. So the core value of the book is basically investing in assets, focusing on financial education, and thinking like a business owner. It also focuses very, very, very heavily on borrowing money, on leverage. So when you hear me say leverage throughout this podcast, know that I'm talking about borrowing money or using other people's money to be able to purchase assets. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. So in Robert's view, you should never save money. You shouldn't necessarily invest money other than in assets. So you should be in debt for, in his case, a lot of what he did in the beginning was real estate. So he would get mortgages. He actually bought his first home. And if you read the book, which I highly recommend that you do, you'll see that he bought his first home in Hawaii using a credit card. I wish that was still possible today and get the kind of returns that he got. Unfortunately, that kind of return is in the past. But that's one example of what he did to use what he calls OPM, or other people's money, to be able to acquire an asset that then generates income to you on a perpetual basis. And if you don't put any of your money in it up front, then any return that you get on it is infinite. He also talks about doing things like writing books, creating courses, anything that will generate income that is on the entrepreneur side. Let's contrast that a little bit with Dave Ramsey. Again, Dave wrote, well, one of his books is called Total Money Makeover. And the overview of Dave's philosophy and the book itself, which is really boiled down to what he calls Financial Peace University. He also has a radio show that talks about all this. I think it's great if you watch some of his podcasts, his videos, listen to his radio show. A lot of what Dave says, I think, is fantastic as well. Dave's core value is the exact opposite of Robert's value. And that is that Dave thinks debt in any form or fashion is horrible, and that you should do everything that you can to avoid debt, to get out of debt, and then to reduce your overhead costs and take the difference between what you make in your job or however else you're creating income and investing that. And he specifically says that you should invest in a mutual fund that focuses on the S&P 500, and that over time it will grow and ultimately everybody can become a millionaire. I believe in a lot of what Dave says. I believe in a lot of what Robert says. But they're two opposite approaches. The thing that I have a problem with for both of these is that both assume that their path is the exact right path for everybody. And like we talked about with Beyond the Blueprint, what are we trying to get outside of is that everybody's blueprint is different. It's unique to you. So when Dave Ramsey says you shouldn't have a credit card, which is one of his tenets, I don't necessarily buy into that. I think as long as you can manage having a credit card and you're not going from month to month with a balance so that you're paying interest on it, then using a credit card can have some advantages. Some people can't do that. So if you're not the kind of person that can manage that credit situation, then maybe you shouldn't have a credit card. That's not my choice. That's not for me to decide. That's for you to figure out what is the best thing for you to do. Coming back to comparing some of those philosophies, Kiyosaki's approach to debt is that it is a tool to leverage and to build wealth. So again, let's think about if you were to buy an asset, and it doesn't have to be a property. It could be a single family property, it could be a multifamily property, or it could be a business. You could borrow money to start a business that is going to generate income. Whatever you have to do to generate that income as far as borrowing, Robert Kiyosaki fully supports. He thinks that if you save money, you're basically, in his words, you're a loser. So he actually acts proud, or he says that he's proud of the fact that he owes over $1 billion in debt. So he focuses on always being in debt, and that you should refinance things. You should take the money out because you're able to do that without qualifying for a taxable event. This podcast is not designed to tell you everything about it. Read the book. So Dave Ramsey, when he says to avoid debt, let's talk a little bit about Dave's history. So Dave, when he first started out, might have been compared to Robert Kiyosaki. He actually started out in the real estate side of the world as well, and he owned several properties. The problem that Dave had is that he over-leveraged himself. He had a lot of debt on a lot of different properties, and he had become a millionaire in his 20s. Again, I'm not telling you anything. I'm not trying to steal Dave's thunder. Go read his book, watch his podcast. But Dave had a margin call, for lack of a better term, where the banks said, hey, we want all of the money that you owe on this that's outstanding, and we want it now, for lack of a better term. Well, he didn't have access to the cash. That didn't give him the ability to actually meet that margin call, so he lost everything and went bankrupt. Thus the reason that he is so adamant against being in debt. Dave doesn't carry a credit card. He uses a debit card. Every piece of property that Dave owns right now is free and clear. He doesn't buy anything, whether it's a building, whether it's a car, whether it's a house, whatever it is that he purchases, he pays cash for it. Both of these gentlemen know that you cannot save your way completely with cash or with a savings account into being financially independent or successful. They look at it two different ways. Their investing philosophies, Kiyosaki, he wants to invest in real estate, sometimes stocks, but he actually kind of turns his nose up at stocks a bit. But he also is very heavily focused on entrepreneurship, whether again, that's writing a book or buying a business or investing in a apartment complex, different things like that. Dave Ramsey believes heavily that once you get yourself out of debt and you actually are able to live below your means, that you should be focused on investing in mutual funds, which could include a 401k, and long-term investing, again, after you reach that financial stability. Until you reach the stability part, he wants you to pay off your debt, which there's a lot to be said for that. Dave has a formula that he lists in the book that tells you the way to pay off your debt that might be counterintuitive to some people. Actually, some financial advisors may tell you it's the wrong way to do it, but everything that Dave talks about has a psychological basis to it. And there's a reason why he approaches paying off debt the way that he does. Again, read the book. You'll see his reasoning. Hopefully that it makes sense to you. So Kiyosaki, he studies how finance works. Okay. He wants you to understand the way that banks lend money, the fact that banks want you to borrow money, the fact that when you do borrow money from a bank, you can rely on the bank somewhat to keep you from making investments that are too risky because they have some risk involved in it as well. There's an aspect on an ongoing basis with Robert Kiyosaki of continually educating yourself, specifically with how to use debt or how to use leverage. For Dave Ramsey, the focus and the importance is on basic budgeting and the discipline of personal financing. So if you're living on, I'm just going to use a round number. If you're living on $1,000 a month is what your bills cost. And I know your bills are probably well over that, but I'm using a round number. If it's $1,000 a month that it costs you to live, figure out a way to live on $850 because you got $150 at that point. Once you have your emergency fund built up, that you can take that $150 and invest it, and you do it consistently. You do it almost automatically so that over time that it will grow. A little plug for Dave Ramsey's website. There is a retirement or investment calculator on the Dave Ramsey website that will show you easily how if you invest a certain amount over a certain amount of time with an expected return. Dave likes you to use 10 or 12%. My personal opinion is you need to use 7 or 8% as an expected return. You'll be able to see how over time that through the miracle of compounding interest that you will be making money like you didn't realize you could before. The inverse of the miracle of compound interest for your investments is the crisis of compounding interest for things that you're paying, in his view, that you are paying interest to a bank or anybody else on. As far as Robert Kiyosaki is concerned, if you're making more interest than you're spending, you're still ahead. Again, guys, I don't know if I'm jumping around too much with this or if it's starting to make sense. What I really want to come across to you is that you should read both of these books and you should figure out where you sit on the spectrum. So which approach is right for you? So there are pros and cons to both of them. The pros to Dave's philosophy is that it keeps you out of debt. There is a psychological feeling of well-being knowing that if something goes wrong, if there is an emergency that occurs, you are prepared for it and you've structured your life in a way that you are already living below your means. So you don't have to have as much money going forward in order to survive whatever it is that happened, but that you will rebound from it and prosper. That's one of the pros for Dave's approach. One of the cons is it might be slower. than Kiyosaki. Robert Kiyosaki's method is based on doing it quickly. The cons, really the only con that I can see on the Dave Ramsey side, is that he limits you. If you follow his advice and his guidance to a T, he limits you to some things that I personally think there's some value in. And I'll go over some of that here in just a little while. On the Kiyosaki side, the pro is that it happens fast. You're able to ramp up. I shouldn't say faster than what it could happen with the Dave Ramsey side. Dave Ramsey's relying on your salary or your income. Robert Kiyosaki is relying on you finding the right deals and the right businesses to either buy, start, or invest in that will have a greater return, at least quicker than what you can get if you are living below your means and socking it away. That's the advantage of the Kiyosaki side. The disadvantage, you can over leverage yourself. You could make a bad purchase. It is infinitely more dangerous to go the Kiyosaki route than it is the Ramsey route. You have to decide what is your level of risk tolerance, and then you can decide which approach is going to be the right approach for you for a long-term success. Both, I want to point out again, both of them are about investing. You cannot earn your way into financial security with a saved salary alone. If you're putting it in a savings account or something like that, inflation will beat you. You have to invest it in something, whether that is a mutual fund, an exchange traded fund. I personally don't invest in individual stocks very often. I'm not good at it. Know your strengths, know what you're good at, know what you're not good at. If you are good at it and you're able to pick the right stocks, good for you. To me, it feels more like gambling than investing, but maybe that's because I'm just not that good at it. But you have to invest in one way or another. Both of these guys are focused on the investing side. So what are some of the principles in a real life scenario that we can talk about? Let's take a quick step back. What is my opinion? Where do I sit on this? Well, I sit in the middle, and maybe there's both sides of the middle, and I'm not sure. I think it depends on the day which side of the middle I'm sitting on. So I believe wholeheartedly, personally, in living below your means. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care how little money you make. You need to focus on and set up a system that you are going to live below your means. I don't care if you end up making $10 million a year. If you're making $10 million a year and you can buy anything you want, great, good for you. You need to be saving a big portion of that 10 million, in my opinion, because if you get used to spending the 10 million and something goes wrong and the 10 million is not there anymore, if you've built a lifestyle, especially if there's leverage or loans associated with it, you've got problems. I personally have a little bit more of a risk tolerance to where I'm outside of what Dave would. If I told Dave Ramsey exactly the way I manage my finances and my investments, he would be nice about it. Dave seems to be a good guy, but he would definitely tell me that I'm being risky. I do believe in leverage. As a matter of fact, somebody told me once that the only reason to be fearful of leverage is if you don't have confidence in the asset that you're purchasing with the leverage. I believe that. Now, there are limits to that, in my opinion. I personally don't allow myself or my family to be leveraged in a way that if a piece of property that we own, for example, if we lose a tenant or if something goes wrong, never let one or two bad deals turn you upside down. You need enough income from the other things that you've got going on that if you lose a tenant, real world example. So I do have a tenant at a building that my family owns that tenant just recently decided they were going to declare bankruptcy. Well, I have 2.5 years left on the lease for that tenant, and they're wanting to cut a deal or they're threatening to add my real estate company to part of the bankruptcy. So number one, I know that if I get no more rent out of that, that I'm not going to be upside down. On that particular property, I will be, and I'll have to take some of the income from some of the other properties that we're involved in to be able to offset that. But here's what it does. Number one, it doesn't threaten my family's ongoing ability to survive and to prosper, but it also puts me in a position to where I can negotiate a little more confidently, I guess I would say, because I know that if I ask for a little bit more of what they honestly owe than what they're wanting to give, and they decide to just drop the whole thing, that we're going to be okay. That gives me the ability not to drop my pants, so to speak, quite as much. And so we don't over leverage ourselves, but we do have leverage on that building. There is an amount that's owed. We put some money down on it ourselves. I don't particularly use other people's money for everything. I try to use other people's money when it makes sense. I don't like paying interest, but if you have a tenant in the building, in essence, I guess you could lie to yourself, which is what I choose to do, and say that the tenant's paying the interest. So, that's kind of a real world situation that's actually going on right now for me that shows that I really kind of sit truly probably in the middle, but it depends on the day. If I run across a deal that looks exciting to me, whether that's a business that is for sale, and when I say business, it could be any kind of business. It could be a real estate deal. It could be a car wash, a dry cleaner, a laundromat, anything any kind of asset that is going to provide you a return is something that you could use leverage to get involved in. Again, Dave Ramsey would say, just wait, save up the money to do that. Well, knowing that I don't allow myself to be over leveraged too much in any one area, I choose to try to ramp it up a bit and to save faster than I would be able to otherwise by employing both sides of the fence on this. However, I do not believe in Robert Kiyosaki's method of leverage on everything and using other people's money no matter really what the interest rate is. There's a formula that I follow. I came up with the formula. I'm not going to share it with you guys. You need to come up with your own formula. And the reason I say that is because I know my risk tolerance. I know my family's risk tolerance. And so my formula is probably going to be different than your formula. But as you're developing this, as you're learning, you will be able to come up with your own formula as well. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with you being on the side that says, I don't want to use leverage. I want to do what Dave says. I promise you it works. If it didn't, there wouldn't be as many people that read that book and as many people as follow his advice. Dave Ramsey is brilliant at what he's put together. And he's got a huge following for people that absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, are proof that what he says is true. All of these things are basically about you creating habits and you changing your own behavior. Well, no, that brings me to one of my business. You guys have heard me talk about this podcast is sponsored by Galactic Performance Solutions. That is the company that I am one of the owners in that focuses on changing a audience's behavior to be able to increase the bottom line of another company. It's all about focus. It's all about the changing of habits to support what internally motivates and drives an individual to be more productive. There are different ways you can do that. You can do it with group travel, online reward systems, individual travel. We use data and use that data and turn it into usable information to be able to support the positive change in production that I'm talking about. So the reason I bring that up right now, this is not necessarily a shameless plug for Galactic, even though maybe it is. The reason I bring it up is all of these things and all the systems that I'm talking about putting into place with what you're trying to do become financially independent. They work across the board. They work within Galactic. That's the formula that we use to be able to positively change people's behavior that will not only benefit them, but benefit the company that they work for. So again, coming back to some of the other things that we were talking about earlier, I can't focus enough on the Dave side of saving more than you spend. Don't over leverage yourself. or your business for that matter of fact. You should, in my opinion, should work towards trying to become your own line of credit in certain instances. Sometimes it won't make sense to do that. I'm giving you my opinion. I want to say that again. I want to stress that deeply, that I'm giving you my opinion. There are people that would tell me that the way that I don't necessarily rush to refinance a building to pull the cash out of it, that I'm losing out because I could use that cash to purchase another building or another house or another this or another that. And you know what? On paper, mathematically, that's true. Psychologically, I wouldn't sleep as much. So I don't do that. Figure out what is the right way for you. Guys, read these books. Read both of them. There's going to be more books that we talk about throughout the podcast and the series of things that we discuss. These are the first two that I think you should read. There are others that are going to focus on changing your habits and doing things like that. I hear a lot of people talking about habits lately. Really, when we're talking about habit, we're talking about consistency and discipline. As a reminder, you're not what you do every day, but you are what you do most days. So read these books first. Then we're going to talk about some books that, not just books, but maybe some YouTubers that you might want to take a look at, that will talk about the value of consistency, the value of discipline, the value of making progress through habits. So, conclusion of the recap of the books, the core differences between Kiyosaki and Ramsey. Kiyosaki thinks you should owe money on everything. Dave Ramsey thinks that you should owe money on nothing. Both of them think that their method is exactly what you should do. Both of them have something to sell you. In this case, I'm not trying to sell you something, but I am trying to sell you each one of their books because there is huge value in each side. And they're tools. They're tools that you can learn from, that you're being exposed to by reading these books. And you know what? I would go so far as to say, read both books, set them down, walk away from them for however long you need to do it, a few weeks, a month, however long, and go read them again after you've done some other research, after you've educated yourself in some other ways. See if you picked up some new things out of it. See what you hear differently in the text they put down on paper. So, I want to encourage you guys to think about which philosophy aligns with your current financial situation as well as your long-term goals. Hopefully you got a little bit of a flavor through this discussion as to what that looks like. If you don't like to read, get one of the audiobooks. I personally consume better if I read it, but do what's right for you. Do what you think is best for you. However you're going to retain it, however you're going to be able to use it in the most effective way for you. So I got a little homework for you guys. Here's your chance to take control of your financial future. So try one of these things. Or let's look at option A. If you resonate more with Dave Ramsey's philosophy, choose one of his baby steps. Google it. Dave Ramsey's baby steps are all over the internet. Choose one of Dave's baby steps to focus on. It might be and he's got them in order. He'll tell you exactly which one to do first. I'm suggesting you look at, and there's nothing wrong with that order. I actually like the order, but pick the one that resonates with you. Starting an emergency fund, paying off a specific debt, getting a grasp. It might be a good idea to read the baby steps and kind of know what they are before you read the book, because the book will then reinforce the things that you read in the baby steps. So if you resonate more with what Dave says and you think you're more of a saver than a borrower, check out the baby steps, pick one of them, at least one, and dig deeper. Option B, if you resonate more with Robert and his philosophy, start exploring ways to invest in assets. So look into some real estate. Again, he does some stock stuff. Every now and then I hear him talking and kind of thumbing his nose at stocks because he really, really, really focuses on physical assets or starting a side hustle, whether that's that you have to leverage it or not. That's going to depend on what that side hustle is. Start building your knowledge on what those things are and what the areas that Robert Kiyosaki focuses on. Or my favorite option, C, is why don't you do both? Because again, for me, neither one of them is actually correct. I shouldn't say that. Both of them are actually correct, but neither one of them, in my opinion, is complete. So why not do both? Why not take a look at what it is you're spending? There's software out there that can help you. If you guys don't know what you're spending, I guess I'm going to mention some of them. So there used to be one called Mint. It is now gone by the wayside, but I bring it up only because some of you may have seen it before. I thought Mint was great. It was a fantastic piece of software. There's a new one called, oh my God, what is the new one? Monarch. Now, there are other ones. Monarch is just the one that I have seen that mimics what Mint used to be able to do the closest. Now, it is a subscription. Mint was free. That's the reason that I used it when it was available. Because remember, we're living below our means. If we find a piece of software that's going to get us what we need and we're not paying for it, then that's fantastic value. Monarch is a subscription fee. Mint probably went away because it couldn't support itself because there was no subscription. If you don't think that there's value in the amount that Mint charges, don't buy it. But find something that will help you track your expenses. You will be shocked at how much you spend on different categories. The main goal for the software packages, no matter which one you choose for me, is to point out to you what you don't know about your existing habits. For example, when we first started using it in my family, I realized how much money we were spending on food every month. It was one of our biggest categories was food. There are things you can do about that. Depending on the size of your family, that might just be something that you have to live with that category, but that might tell you that you need to reduce other categories. If you have a number or whatever your number is that you're trying to hit, that you're going to live off of every month so that you have what I call dry powder to be able to invest in something else. So I think that you should do both, and I think that you should know what it is that you're spending so that you know how to reduce it. But I also think you should focus on how am I going to do something in addition to saving to be able to generate something for the future. And that doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight. A lot of these things that we're going to talk about over the course of the podcast is the fact that all of this, in my opinion, takes time. None of it is overnight. As a matter of fact, the next podcast that we've got coming up is going to focus heavily on time and making sure that you're using it to your advantage and to your full advantage. So take a look at both, in my opinion, but it's up to you. But do something between now and the next podcast that's going to get you to the next step in your journey. So when we talk about time, I also want you to remember that you have time. Okay? None of this is going to happen overnight, but none of it is a rush either. Time is on your side as long as you don't make waiting a habit. We talk a lot about habits. Let's not let waiting be one of those. Okay? We're going to talk about time more, like I said, in the next podcast. Until then, I want you to work hard, be kind to each other, and be disciplined. And remember, I believe in you. Write that down. Thanks so much for listening. Please follow our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And write us a review. We'd love to get your feedback. Beyond the Blueprint is sponsored by Galactic Performance Solutions. It's written and researched by yours truly, Gary Cornwell. Producing and editing is done by the team at Resonate Recordings. Until next time, remember, you do have the answers. You just have to make the effort to find them. I believe in you.